Hello, welcome to the Whiskey Lodgecast. I am your host, DemiTastes, and these are my co-hosts, Spooky Chicken and Duckphill Platypus. And we have something of an agenda today. The Virginia Whiskey Tournament, which we've talked about a couple of times on this podcast already, and on the YouTube, there's a 10-minute video or something like that that was basically our last discussion, particularly about the Virginia Whiskey Tournament. That has kicked off around 4, 5, 6 days ago. I don't recall exactly. There are three
Monday
days.
morning.
Monday morning, 3 days ago. There are 3 days and change left in the polls for the first batch and the second batch. There are more in round one, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we are in round one, but we are doing the first couple of batches of round one simultaneously, not to overwhelm the internet. What this Virginia Whiskey Tournament is not a judging competition, right? We are not critically judging these. We will, for sure, critically judge these whiskeys personally, right? And you too, if you can get access, you should feel free to decide exactly how much you enjoy the whiskeys from these companies. Keeping in mind there are 30-something entrants in the
44 this year.
44.
Ooh.
Impressive. And very much looking forward to that. That's a lot of whiskey. That's a lot of whiskey, even for somebody who has a sizable collection to begin with. That would be a quarter of my collection just there on Virginia whiskey. I'm not going to go out and buy those bottles, but what I could recommend is if you've got a handful of friends, 6 people or so, and you live in Virginia, and you can, or somewhere else that has access to all of these brands, you could go ahead and as a group, this is still going to be expensive. You could go ahead and as a group buy one of everything and share them. And that would be a fun thing to do. Me personally, my local group is more into Scotch, so it's not likely that we're going to get people on board with majority bourbon to experience all of these things. So I'm going to do the best I can, which is probably going to be on a handful of these only. And that's okay. There's a couple of ways. So let me get back on track because I have a tendency, I didn't script this, so I'm going to ramble. Virginia Whiskey Tournament is not a critical judging competition. This is a community-led bracket. This is essentially, for lack of a better term, let's say a popularity contest. This is about the supporters of the brands coming out and saying, I like this more than these other ones at every step of the bracket. And that means that everyone should vote. And I will say the semifinals and the finals last year had hundreds, maybe 1,000 plus votes, if I recall correctly. And it was a lot of fun seeing once you get that kind of hype drummed up, it's a lot of fun to see people like trying to recruit more votes and battle it out and be like, my pick for the best whiskey is better than your pick for the best whiskey, right? Like this ends up being a huge community thing. It's the distilleries communities, it's the whiskey Twitter and the Instagram and the YouTube. It's all these communities coming out of the woodwork and saying, from those choices, this is my favorite, and going on to the next round. There are several ways you can make this choice. If you are able to taste all of these whiskeys, you could pick the one that is most to your tastes. If you are able to research these whiskeys, anybody can do that. Anybody can research these brands and decide if you like what they're doing. And to that end, we have decided that we ought to help you. Because doing all that whiskey is quite an undertaking, and we are a group of people who likes to research whiskey. So, with no further ado, Phill, lead us through it.
All right. So the way this is being run this year is I've got 4 distilleries in each batch, and the batches for round 1. Round 2 is going to be, I believe, 1-on-1. I need to check my bracket again. But there are a lot of distilleries, and a lot of them don't have a lot of reach. For example, River Hill Distillery, which is the first one on our list today, founded in Luray, Virginia in March of 2014, sourcing grain from their own farm and nearby farms across Page County. And one of only a handful of legal distilleries in the area, which is really cool. They have extremely limited distribution. I believe at the moment you can only get their whiskey at their distillery and at their nearest ABC store. which means that, that's an incredibly small sample size. But last year they made it through round one, which is, really cool. Um, and they seem like really nice people. I unfortunately have not been able to make it out to Luray to buy a bottle, but that is on my list to make sure I do before the end of this year. Um, and of course, if you have any questions,
That's not where the caverns are, right?
it is.
Weird
They
question.
are.
Very cool caverns out in the Luray caverns are really cool.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. Um, and they are 100% locally sourced grain in their whiskey, which is a big deal, and it's sort of a through thread of Virginia distilling, is because Virginia has such a high percentage of farmland to other land usage. We have the ability to source so much locally, and I think that has an effect on the whiskey, and of course, how much they're tied into the community. I haven't had anything from them, unfortunately, but I know a few people who have. I have a friend who passed through. They also they board horses and they raise cattle for beef, which is also very cool.
Yeah, so that adds a little bit more color for me, right? They are I feel like it was easy for me to sort of gloss over. They're sourcing grain from their own farm and when they need to getting it from other local places as well. And
Mm,
their own
But within
farm,
the county, which is crazy.
right, yeah. And I don't know how big that county is. Counties can be quite large.
Page County's a pretty good size. It's mostly farmland. There's Luray. It's, I believe, in the valley, so there's not a whole lot of industrial stuff out there. So it's primarily farmland.
Yep. So let me add a little bit more color to why the local sourcing may be particularly interesting to certain people. So first of all, the closer you are between the production of the grain and the production of the whiskey, the less transportation costs and impact on the environment you have to worry about. So being a locally sourced brand has an environmental positive to it, which is important to me. And I personally am willing to pay a little bit more for that, knowing that it is actually more expensive because it's riskier to source your grain from locally, right? When you can't treat your grain as a commodity that you can get from anywhere, you have concerns about yield and availability, and keeping the lights on gets that much harder. And so raising the prices ever so slightly to support local business and to decrease carbon emissions is a big deal. All right, let's move on now with all that said.
R.D. Wilhelm Distillery, which is better known as Reverend Spirits.
It's kind of a nice, simple little logo they've got there with the bullhorns.
Oh yeah.
Good looking bottle, yeah.
So, fun fact: those aren't horns at all.
Uh-oh.
That is clerical collar. So
Oh.
the brand is named after
Oh.
the head distiller's father, Dr. Wilhelm, in this case being a nod to his Austrian heritage, Eugene Dornemann. And, it's sort of a call back to their roots and uh, sort of uh, uh, a look and a respectful nod to where they come from. Um, and they make some interesting stuff. The first 30 barrels were contract distilled to another distillery while they were working out paperwork and permitting with the federal government and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Um, they do have some fantastic label work. Like, I think that the consistency between bottle shape and label design and the fact that it is a really simple read is a really good design in general. The only downside is they have information on a clear sticker on the back with dark writing, and I can't read that at all.
I can't even see that it's there.
Yeah,
Um,
it's tough. I think it is a really cool duality that. So I interpreted bullhorns because I was in the farm mindset. But
Yes.
your note there says it's a clerical collar, not devil's horns. I
I
really
thought it was
like.
devil horns.
Okay, there you go. So I really like that duality, right? Like this is like, a reverend was involved here, but it is
Yeah.
firewater, right? And there's a certain pair of angels on the shoulders kind of element to this that is captured in
Yeah.
that logo, which is that's a real nice logo. Like I think a lot of people, think that you shouldn't buy a whiskey based on bottle design. I've always been of the mindset that like do your research, but it's a perfectly legitimate reason to buy a whiskey
Oh yeah.
because you like how the bottle looks or you like how the label looks. Oh, let's
Good
back up for a
portion.
second. The pawn mentioned in the previous thing with everything locally sourced, terroir, right? The one word terroir.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Like to the extent that terroir exists in whiskey, and we can get into that later. If you're gonna find it, it's gonna be in an all local kind of distillery. Absolutely.
I agree. Um, I do obviously because I just held it up. Have a bottle of their bourbon, and it is very good stuff. I think it could stand a little bit higher proof, but they're really getting their foot in the door, trying to get out there. They aren't a very old company, and so they've got to market to as many people as possible. And so they can't come out of the door swinging with a really make you think whiskey. And they do a fantastic job of balancing that with putting something in this bottle that is, really something that pulls you in and gives you a reason to spend more time with it. And I think that it is very good stuff. It's 40% alcohol by volume. It is not age statement. Um, but again, they're not a terribly old distillery. They're a relatively recent addition to Virginia. Um, they're out in Norfolk, by the way, um, which is an interesting place for a distillery, I think.
Where my grandma's from.
I keep forgetting that you're from out here.
Yeah.
So far, we haven't had a single episode of this podcast that has featured someone from Kentucky, which in American whiskey, of course, is a very significant location for bourbon, at least these days. Although,
Yes.
as Phill likes to remind everyone, that sort of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia area is really arguably the birthplace of American whiskey as we know it.
Have you ever seen an old map of Virginia? We used to own Kentucky.
Yep. And
That is
Tennessee,
true.
a good chunk of Pennsylvania.
Everything out to Ohio, really.
If you go back far enough, the maps are just a really great vector line into nothingness. So, like, if you're drawing the lines really generously, we own a good chunk of Russia.
We almost fought a war with Pennsylvania back in the day over the whiskey producing bit of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And we're gonna do a whole right. This is Phil's episode, but we're gonna get to Ian doing his whole spiel on the history of whiskey
Oh,
in that
man.
area, the
And
whiskey
I'm
rebellion. and so
looking
on.
forward to it because
Yeah.
that's going to be a lot of fun.
As we run out
ready
of the
to do
low hanging fruit topics, we're definitely gonna get into these more specialty topics, and I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Oh yeah.
Any other questions about the Reverend Bourbon?
Did my brain just gloss over you saying how it tastes?
Oh, it is a really interesting, fairly grain forward bourbon. So it's got lots of the sort of corn sweetness that sort of like it's hard to describe, but I know it and I know that other whiskey drinkers know it, that corn sweetness with just a touch of rice spice and some like dark cocoa-y chocolatey notes from wheat, and all of that is layered nicely on top of a fairly gentle bed of that tannic spice and slight char that make it a very friendly, approachable whiskey.
I love that. Did you read that, or was that off the top of your head?
And that is just off the top of my head.
Excellent. That's a real good off the top of your head review. So I'm gonna ask you, like, I don't want you to give a rating number or anything like that because I don't want to sway the results of the voting. But let me just ask you, thumbs up or thumbs down, or if you like, are you happy with the
Thumbs up.
purchase of that bottle?
I'm absolutely happy with the purchase of this bottle. It's one of those, when you're buying this sort of thing, you are paying a little bit more, because if you don't, they won't do anything, because they won't survive. And you know, if you want distilleries to do like cool, wild, experimental things, they need to survive long enough to do that. And I think that that is an important element of this, is supporting those distilleries so they can fulfill their dream of creating interesting and unique whiskeys that are their own style.
Absolutely. I do have a question. I remembered. Uh, First of all, when you showed me that bottle, my first impression is that looks like a gin label. And then I actually see on your slide,
Yes.
it appears they have vodka and gin as well, and I think those are really nice
Yes.
labels.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about the consistency of their label across the spirits. They color code the bottom of the label on the like little sort of bottom of the pennant thing. So the bourbon is red. Um, the I believe it's the gin is blue and the vodka is purple, or I may have that backwards.
Let me zoom in. Yes, the vodka's blue and the gin is purple. Can't quite see that on the stream, I think. All right,
I
moving
have
on.
not met these guys, but I would love to, because they seem like genuinely very interesting people. They're also heavily into the restaurateur industry in the area, and have run a number of bars and restaurants in Norfolk and the surrounding area.
On that note, go meet your local distillers. They're often more than happy to talk to interested people, and they are, as a whole, really nice people that really care about what
Yes.
they make. Right? Nobody gets in. Let's face it. Nobody gets into distilling because it is the most lucrative career. And especially in craft distilling, right? You've got to constantly thread the needle of pricing things that you can keep the lights on while also keeping the prices low enough that people will actually buy them. So it is sadly kind of a low margin business for the actual producer. So by and large, distillers are people who love what they do, and those are the great people to talk to. All right, next up, Three
Okay.
Crosses.
Ooh,
Three
wow.
Crosses.
Aha, another bottle that you have.
Yes.
That's a great
I
label.
don't have all of.
Such a good
Oh yeah.
label.
My favorite part of it is actually the little medallion, because that's actually a piece of embossed metal that is glued to the bottle.
Ooh,
And that is the coat of arms of the founder's family, which I believe is Davenport.
I love that
But
tie-in.
they're the first legal distillery in Powhatan, Virginia since Prohibition. There were apparently at least two pre-Prohibition, but I couldn't really find good solid sources on that. They only operate two very small stills. The They have one 150-gallon still and one 200-gallon still, and they're producing enough to get distribution all the way from Powhatan, Virginia, to where I am up near DC. I've met the guys who make this at the Spirits Expo at Belmont Farm, and they're very cool. I got to try their Dark Horse Rye, which is phenomenal, and I'd love to get a bottle of that, but it isn't available locally. This is their American whiskey, which is a bourbon mash aged in used barrels. It is a really nice, again, very approachable, definitely aiming for a crowd pleaser, and I think really hitting the mark. It's gentle, easygoing on the nose, a little bit sweet, some like soft spice, and just a hint of tannic notes, and lots of caramel and vanilla, which I think comes from the used barrels.
I was gonna say that sounds like a used barrel, and I would love to soapbox here. American whiskey fans will, uh, American whiskey fans hate this one trick. Um, um, yeah, it turns out that most legal categories of whiskey that have a specific name in the United States require new oak, which is getting harder to get and more expensive. It also turns out most of the rest of the world really likes using refill casks, stuff that has been used before. And actually, there's a whole industry of buying used bourbon barrels because you can only make bourbon in a barrel one time. And so that is quite a useful commodity for the rest of the world industry. I will say, for bourbon lovers, especially if you are getting into bourbon and you find bourbon too tannic, um, the next best or next better thing, depending on your perspective, is going to be an American whiskey made from a bourbon mash and aged in a used barrel, exactly like this. It's going to cut down that tannic element, and it's going to give you everything else that you like from a bourbon. It's honestly a sadly underrated, maybe overlooked category. This sort of thing is what you're going to get from craft producers. Is a little less expensive to produce because you're not using new oak. And that is a boon to them. And it also lets them be a little more creative with the flavor profile, which we love to see.
These guys make a lot of really good stuff. Pretty much everything that I've had from them, I remember fondly. The regular rye and the dark rye are fantastic. The TTB refers to it as a fanciful name, which is the sort of slightly more colorful branded name for their for a spirit. Their rye is called Noble Hound Rye, which I like because I like dogs. And the Noble Hound Dark Rye is, I believe, finished in port barrels or port style barrels, and it is very good. And it's a very dark pumpernickel rye, and I think that that is fantastic. I really enjoy that. It's different from other ryes in the region, which I believe it was Raymond said recently in the lodge that sort of regionality of style is fading, and it's opening the door for distilleries to do their own thing to a higher extent, and I think that's very cool. And it is fantastic stuff. If you can get your hands on it, I recommend it. I really like it. I'm also a terrible shill for Virginia Distilling because it's where I'm from. It's where my heart is.
Tarnished
I,
Truth.
Tarnished Truth, another one that I have.
Awesome. 3 in a row.
These guys are out of Virginia Beach. They're interesting because they're the only American distilling company or distillery that is situated in a hotel. They are in the Cavalier Hotel overlooking the Atlantic, which
I
is
used to go to the
very cool.
hotel right next to that for breakfast all the time.
It's genuinely an extremely cool looking facility. It looks like because they basically where their still is, which is a big 500. I mean, it's not really big, but for craft distilling, it is pretty big. 500-gallon hybrid pot still with a 20-foot vodka column, where the hotel laundry used to be, and it's a really beautiful looking facility. All their equipment was manufactured by Vendome, which is sort of one of the premier still builders in the U.S. Um, the this is not a fantastic example of what they're doing currently because this is a sourced MGPI product, um, and they have moved on to bottling their own distilled product at this point, or so I am told. Uh, and they have a very higher or a higher end, very nice looking old Cavalier bourbon, which I have not personally tried, but I have on pretty good. It's fantastic. It's, I believe, 10 years old, and it is a product of Virginia. These guys know how to do labeling and marketing, and that is something that they are extremely good at. And they also hosted a pretty big Virginia bourbon thing last year or the year before, and are frequently seen, holding a hand out to welcome and help out newer and smaller distillers in the Commonwealth, and that is fantastic. That is sort of one of the best things about craft distilling is how much help one distiller is happy to give to another.
Yeah, I'm looking at their website right here. If you ever are in the area, I highly suggest going back by there because this place looks cool as hell.
I do think that operating a distillery out of a hotel is like that's first of all, that's got to be expensive. Like that can't be cheap. The real estate, right? Like a hotel is going to do well by being on good real estate, and using a whole bunch of your square footage to run a distillery is no small thing. And that a 500-gallon still is no small still either. That's, and not to mention the aging and so on. Do they age on site?
I believe they have an off-site aging facility, but it is a place that they own. They aren't doing something weird like sending their barrels somewhere else to age. A couple of distillers share an aging facility out. I can't think of where exactly it is, but it's basically a couple of the smaller distillers rack their barrels in the same facility to save on space, and they all work together fairly well and are friendly with each other. So that's a method that works for them.
Now,
Yes.
once again, I'll ask the question, thumbs up, thumbs down. How do you feel about that bottle purchase?
This one I feel less good about because it really is just the MGPI high rye, and it is expensive for the MGPI high rye at 3 years old. But their own spirit, I've had samples of it, and for the price, I would definitely recommend picking up a bottle of it. The Old Cavalier is expensive. They have a bottle and bond bourbon that is fantastic. It is a little bit more tannic. It is less of that definite MGPI sort of flavor profile, but it is a similar style in that it is a higher rye bourbon, and I recommend trying it if you can.
Do me a favor and hold up that bottle one more time, because I'm not sure if it's super clear from
Yes.
the picture. That is an extra rectangular bottle with a nice big foot on it.
So I mentioned briefly that a good portion of the cost of that bottle is the packaging. That beautiful label, that beautiful bottle, and that is an expense that craft distillers have to face that is lesser for big guys, and that is one of the reasons why craft whiskey costs a little bit more comparatively. Because this stands out. This is something that you see on the shelf and you go, oh, that's cool. And that helps sell their whiskey. And that's important.
Yep, completely agree. I think I'm going to go back to the bracket slide. I'll just read that off.
Yes.
Make sure that we got the right ones. So the first bracket, batch A of round 1, River Hill Distillery, Reverend Spirits, Three Crosses Distillery, and Tarnished Truth.
That's a really hard list to choose from.
Yeah. I mean, all of these brackets are really difficult for me because, like, I haven't had anything from River Hill, but their story is so cool that I can't help but feel like I owe them, like, some, like, extra support. Reverend Spirits makes a fantastic product. They've got a great story and beautiful labels. Three Crosses, they're really cool people. They make really good whiskey. I mean, really good whiskey is a common thread throughout Virginia distilling. Um, I I might be biased, but I think that there is a higher percentage of good whiskey being produced for the number of distilleries we have in the Commonwealth than pretty much anywhere else in the States.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Whiskey Lodgecast. This has been our roundup of the distilleries featured in the Virginia Whiskey Tournament, Round 1, Batch A. Once again, anyone can vote. You don't have to have tried the whiskey, and you don't have to be from Virginia. You can vote just because you want to help a brand grow and increase their availability. Hopefully, we've given you enough information to form your opinions about who you'd like to see advance to the next round. This podcast was originally streamed live on Twitch on our weekly stream, Thursdays at 5 p.m. Pacific Time. You can also find our unedited streams uploaded to YouTube within a day or so later. This week's stream included our breakdown of Batch B as well, so stay tuned for an edited episode featuring that discussion as well. Check the description for links to the polls and the various places you can find us on the internet. Until next time, cheers.